Hi, and welcome to Lifestyle Management. Here we are in part 2 of Healthy Aging. Now, regardless of what good and healthy things we are doing and incorporating into our lives, we all will die. Now, I'm not trying to be, negative, but we haven't yet seen anybody live on forever. So as we age, there are many things to address and to deal with. And we're going to look at some of the issues, including depression, driving risks, substance misuse and abuse, and of course, coping with and grieving the loss of friends and family. And you own your own preparations you need to take care of that help others and those that we love if we start to pass on. As difficult and as challenging as it might be to talk about death and dying, doing so may help us to demystify and enable us to be more supportive of loved ones and less fearful of our own mortality. So let's get started with challenges of of aging. I'm having some cognitive challenges, so you can see my age creeping up. We'll start with depression. It is estimated that seniors are among the most undertreated populations for mental health, with depression in more than 1/3 of people ages 65 and over going undetected. And so that would suggest that people over 65 who are going through what we would normally see in someone younger and call it depression is being seen as just a normal, everyday, this is the way that people who get older deal with getting older. But it's in fact depression. Depression is a serious problem among elderly. They may face challenges including declining health, the loss of loved ones, social isolation, and physical limitations. Depressed older adults are as likely to benefit from medication as younger individuals, and that will enter into our dialogue in a minute. So when we think of other risks, driving risks, and we've probably all pointed to someone in a car thinking, what are they doing driving? They're too old. In 2014, there were 4,121,205 Canadians over the age of 65 classified as licensed drivers. Driving problems faced by older adults involve visual, cognitive, and motor skills, which may decline with age. Medications are a factor when driving, especially for older adults. Now, older adults need to go get retested for driving. I think it's after age 80, it's every year. Prior to that, it's still more frequently. And as much as they're healthier and happier and better health, driving risks are real. What about smoking? Is it ever too late to quit smoking? Well, some research suggests that older smokers are more likely to be hardcore smokers, heavy smokers who expect never to quit. The sooner a smoker stops using tobacco, the greater their health benefits. Of course, that's easier said than done. If any one of us knows someone who's over 65 who's still smoking, you ask them about quitting smoking, you'll hear why they don't. I'm too old, this has been something I'm doing all my life. It's not easy to get to the point where they might gain some benefit. Substance misuse and abuse. Misuse and abuse of prescription and over-the-counter medications occur frequently among the elderly. The most commonly used drugs are sleeping pills, tranquilizers, pain medications, and laxatives. Now, there's a lot of things that they can do. Because there's problems with remembering, concentration, and thinking, which are the most common side effects of drugs of the elderly, and even some of them going through different experiences of dementia and Alzheimer's, there are different techniques to use to help people take their medications in a timely manner. My dad is getting older now, and the difficulty of taking medications when you're supposed to take it and then not doubling or tripling up because you've missed. There are DOS sets that can be done electronically that only open for the day and the time that medication is available, and it really makes a helpful difference. Now, one of the other problems, of course, that you would expect is alcohol can make mental confusion more confusing and memory problems worse. Surveys have found an increased prevalence of alcoholism among older adults. Now, we've talked about just briefly a few of the things that are sort of like dangers. Here's something that might be surprising you, and you should probably be aware of, is sexuality and aging. A study based on some 3,500 participants found that older adults between ages 57 and 85, yes, you heard me right, 85, remain sexually active. Now, aging doesn't cause some changes in sexual response. Women produce less vaginal lubrication. Men need more time to achieve an erection or orgasm and to attain another erection after ejaculation. None of these changes reduce sexual pleasure or sexual desire. So the tip here is, if you have older parents or grandparents, I would recommend call before you visit. Now let's look at whether or not, or how, in what way are older Canadian adults using digital technology. Now, Canada's older adults have embraced technology and are the fastest growing group users of the internet. That might have surprised you, unless you're on Facebook and your grandma's asking to friend you. In a study of online activities of Canadian seniors, 7 in 10 think that technology is helping them live their lives in their own home and for a longer time, and makes it easier to manage the day-to-day basis. Seniors use email to keep in contact with others. Social network sites like Facebook are being used. Skype and FaceTime helps seniors to keep in touch with family and friends. Because one of the big benefits, or at least the things that people can do as they get older that help them stay happy and healthier longer, is social networking. Technology allows that to happen. Primary reason for the use includes communication, seeking information, entertainment, commercial purposes, and finding new people. A recent study indicated that older people who acknowledge the importance of the internet tend to be satisfied using it as a leisure activity. Good on them. All right, now this last section is kind of and I'm going to put it in brackets, a taboo. We don't talk about death and dying, but we're going to talk about it briefly here. Now, the first little thing we're going to chat on is defining death. Now, that seems pretty obvious. You die, you're dead. But in our society, death isn't a part of everyday life like it once was. Death has been broken down into the following categories. We have functional death, cellular death, cardiac death, brain death, and spiritual death. Now, you'll find those in your textbook, but it just gives us some sense that, for the different reasons that satisfy different criteria, we have different definitions of death. Regardless of how we define death, denying death is something that takes place for many seniors and for people who look after seniors. A reasonable amount of denial helps us focus on the day-to-day realities of living. However, excessive denial can be life-threatening. As a person gets older, their denying of their own mortality sometimes just helps them get on with the day-to-day activities. That day is going to come regardless. But to deny it to the point that you don't look after yourself can be a problem. So the emotional response and emotional responses to dying. Now, this has been well-established stages, if you will. There are 5 typical stages of reaction that a person goes through when facing death. And this was established by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She did an awful lot of research into this area. The first stage, denial. At first knowledge that death is coming, a terminally ill patient rejects the news. Anger is the second stage. The dying person begins to feel resentment and rage regarding imminent death. Third, bargaining. A patient may try to bargain, usually with God or their spiritual deity, for a way to reverse or at least postpone dying. The fourth stage, depression. Now, not clinical depression like a psychological disorder. The patient gradually realizes the full consequences of his or her condition and begins to grieve. And then the fifth stage is acceptance. The person accepts the reality of death. Now, several stages may occur at the same time, and some may happen even out of sequence. So we get to a point where we are aware of our own mortality. Perhaps earlier than this would be best to do what we call the preparing for death. You can take some decisions about the end of your life. You can make these decisions yourself. For example, would I prefer to receive or refuse any specific treatment if I were unconscious or incapable of voicing my opinion? Now, these are questions that we ought to think about, because we can have an influence on how we are treated when we're not able to make those decisions ourselves. But would I like my bodily systems to be kept functioning by extraordinary life-sustaining measures, even though my natural systems have failed, life support systems? If I could not survive without mechanical assistance, would I want to be kept alive or resuscitated if my heart were to stop? And we don't always think about this, but these are things that as we prepare, we need to think about, because there are documents we can sign to make this happen. Would I like the province to decide how to distribute my property, or would I rather name the recipients in my estate? Would I like to decide how to handle my funeral arrangements? Well, let's look at some of these conditions. What are advance directives? Advance directives are used to specify the kind of medical treatment individuals want in case of medical crisis. A healthcare proxy is an advance directive that gives someone else the power to make decisions on your behalf. The do not resuscitate, the DNR, that's a directive that indicates that you do not want to be resuscitated in the case that your heart stops beating. All right? So your inevitable demise occurs. You pass away. Do you have a will? Well, what is a living will? A living will is not just for people who don't want it kept alive by artificial means. It can be used to indicate that they want all possible medical treatments and technology to prolong their lives. Now, a living will is about how to prolong or keep you living. Wills, this is different. This is a formal will is a typed document prepared by a lawyer or a notary and signed by you in front of at least two witnesses who cannot be beneficiary of your or your spouse. There are other techniques used in other provinces, in Quebec, for example, and perhaps other places in the world. The holographic will is prepared in your handwriting, so it's not typed, and it's signed by you with no witnesses necessary. It's important that you specify, who you wish to raise your children, should that be of issue, who should have your property. If you die without a will, the state, federal, or provincial will make these directions for you and your decisions for you, and that may not benefit the people you want to see benefited. Now, within aging and getting older, unfortunately, suicide is an issue. Suicide among the elderly is a danger that often goes unnoticed. One of the main factors leading to suicide and illness, especially terminal illness. Now, there is what's known as rational suicide. Now, advocates of the right to self-deliverance argue that individuals in great pain or faced with the prospect of a debilitating, hopeless battle against an incurable disease can and should be able to end their own lives. Many mental health professionals argue that what makes a patient with severe illness suicidal is depression, not their physical condition. However, on April 16, 2016, the Federal Ministers of Health and Justice tabled legislation for the doctor-assisted death. Now, you notice the term that's used, doctor-assisted death. Now, there was certainly a lot of controversy around, doctors, their role is to sustain life, not to bring on death. and some groups were calling it doctor-assisted suicide, or that you shouldn't be doing this. But there have been these contentious issues. The bill was legalized and regulated, and regulate doctor-assisted dying. Nevertheless, it happened, and it was passed in Parliament on June 17th, 2016. It'll be interesting going forward where this goes and how it affects other people who may not have the same sort of condition that this bill is targeting. One of the elements, of course, that we would definitely need to chat about upon a death of someone is grief and grieving. Death of a loved one may be a single most upsetting and feared event in a person's life. Grieving may continue for many years for many people. So what are some of the effects that grieving might have on our health? Well, men and women who lose partners, parents, or children sometimes endure so much stress that they are at increased risk of serious physical and mental illness, and even their own premature death. Now, of course, there are more methods, different ways that people mourn. And grief is a psychological necessity, not self-indulgence. And that's an important distinction. Grief isn't something that you're doing to bother anybody or just to make yourself feel bad. It's psychological necessity. Only by working through grief, dealing with feelings and anger and despair, and adjusting emotionally and intellectually to a loss can a bereaved individual make their way back to the living world with hope and with love. So how can you help survivors of a loss? Family and friends must take the initiative to spend time with those who are mourning the loss of a loved one. Most bereaved people don't need professional psychological counseling. In most instances, sharing their feelings with friends is all that's needed. In the more, if someone is moving through this and it's taking a long time, perhaps having some of that professional support will be very helpful. I hope this has been helpful. I hope it hasn't been too unsettling. Like I said, we don't all get out of this alive, so learning about and preparing for our own mortality is important, and having this conversation ought to be more fluid and more open, because it's a difficult time for everybody, and the more we talk about it, the more maybe we'll be comfortable with how to be more helpful and supportive and not so afraid. I hope this has been helpful for you. Good luck and carry on the good fight. Bye now.